In a time long past and eons before technology could aid and guide us on our travels, the stars and planets were our compass. Travel was a grueling process, and there was always a mission or purpose for each path that was undertaken. One of the most recorded and arduous of all journeys was the biblical tale of Moses leading the freed Israelites out of Egypt. There have been many variations of the truth of this epic saga, and many details were left out or skimmed over in the biblical version of the events that took place. While in general the minor details of this historic event may seem insignificant, there are some particular aspects that demand highlighting and a greater acknowledgement than they have been given in the past. In particular, one aspect of the story could have huge implications within modern and advanced technology. This intriguing element was a component of an Egyptian practice, an alchemic process to create a substance that was exported out of the kingdom and used to aid in the communication of humans with their gods. Few would ever consider that the colossal amount of strange disappearances reported and investigated by researcher and author David Paulides could possibly have any connections with this ancient mysterious substance. A product normally saved and used by the ancient elite Egyptian hierarchy, linking the opening of the doorways to other worlds, Moses and the Exodus, and advanced technology. To gain an insight to this mysterious component that has found its way into so many aspects of fringe research, such as the paranormal, ufology and even cryptozoology, we must go back in history and look at one of the first disclosures that lifts the veil off the substance's very presence. A boy child was born to Pharaoh Amenhotep III and his wife Tai. Tai was the daughter of Joseph, the chief minister of the Pharaoh's great house, and therefore was not of noble blood. So it was decreed that any children born of their union would not be worthy as heir to the throne, as she was just a commoner. To secure the succession to the throne of any children born to the pharaoh by his other wife, it was declared during Tai's first pregnancy that if she bore a son, he must be put to death. As the general story goes, Tai brought her new son to the river and placed him in a reed basket, where mercifully fortune shone on the man-child when a family of Israelites found him, adopted him, and gave him the name Aminadab. In the meantime, the Pharaoh's second wife does not bear him a son, but a daughter they called Nefertiti, and by blood she was Aminadab's half-sister. The years passed, and as old age catches up to us all, the Pharaoh becomes ill, and this is when Nefertiti takes her father's place to rule. Aminadab soon marries his half-sister to share the burden. Eventually Amenhotep III dies, and Aminadab rises to the throne as Amenhotep IV. During his rule with his wife Nefertiti, he fathers 6 daughters and a son, and begins a drive to worship only one god, Aten. This created a lot of enemies and unrest, but nonetheless he forged ahead with his plan. His first stage was building new temples next to the old temples that were dedicated to the worship of the old gods. The next phase of his plan was closing down the old temples and taking their revenues. New temples and monuments were erected, and idyllic statues were constructed for the worship of this new omnipotent, faceless god called Aten, the sun god. In dedication to Aten, he changed his name once again to Akhenaten, its meaning beneficial to Aten. This act infuriated the priests of the old belief system, and social unrest ensued. In turn, Akhenaten was forced to abdicate his throne, and he was banished from Egypt with those that followed him. He left the kingdom with only his devotees and his royal sceptre. The sceptres were very symbolic, and each pharaoh had his own individual one. Akhenaten's was crowned with a coiled serpent. He and his followers fled to Sinai, a remote and arid desert land, but he saw it as a place of virtue, a place that held the power of the pharaohs and their elite cohorts. His devoted people believed him as the true ruler and leader and called him the Mose or Moses. meaning born of or true son. Eventually he became Moses. There were many tales in the earlier accounts of the Bible, but there was no Red Sea incident, and he did not lead the Israelites to a Mount Sinai because it didn't exist. Mount Sinai only first appeared in historical texts after the 4th century, to which it owes thanks in part to the Greeks that built a small chapel on the mount. They decided that this was the place where God imbued Moses with the tablets containing the commandments. In actual fact, Moses led them to Mount Horeb in the Sinai desert, to the seat of a temple that was partially dug into the mountain, 2,500 feet above sea level, which had been built around the time of the 4th dynasty. It was on Mount Horeb that Moses introduced his followers to the power of the pharaohs and everything else that we have been told. This temple on the mount was a smelting plant, a place where gold was broken down into its barest components and reduced to a simple white powder, a powder so fine that it could be lost in the ridges of our fingerprints. This powder has had many names over the course of time, such as Mufkut in Egypt, Shamana in Mesopotamia, and the Paradise Stone in Alexandria. It was formed into white cones, and depictions in hieroglyphics show these cones of powder being presented to the pharaoh for consumption. In the Bible, the powder became known as manna. In 1904, the Egyptian Exploration Fund financed an expedition to Mount Horeb. Not only did they uncover the abandoned temple, they also discovered every pharaoh that had ruled between the 4th and 19th dynasties displayed on the highly polished interior walls within the mountain. As the archaeologists continued their investigation, they uncovered a hoard of priceless white powder, estimated to weigh over 50 tons, but sadly they didn't know the value of this discovery, and the site was left exposed to the elements, and the white powder eventually disappeared. Manna contains exotic matter, and when the other elements that make up gold, such as copper, are removed, these monatomic elements are consumed, they produce profound results that are beyond belief. The effects are immediate and accrue in the system, and during scientific tests in Switzerland, it was observed to balance both hemispheres of the brain. This in turn produced further physiological alterations, such as great wisdom, sharper intuition, and psychic abilities. The biological regeneration of damaged DNA was also noted, so this would greatly extend the lifespan of those consuming it. It was observed that various light spectrums had puzzling effects on the manna. When the powder was exposed to longer frequencies, it would produce a bright flash, and the powder lost approximately 44% of its weight. It was assumed it had burned off, but when the light was taken away, the 44% reappeared. A theory put forward by Russian scientists was that the missing 44% was not actually burning off at all, but was disappearing dimensionally. Another curious observation the lab discovered was that any host holding the powder would become lighter and create a weightless effect if the powder was heated. Once cooled again, it could weigh up to 700 times its starting weight. A startling revelation made in Phoenix, Arizona showed that the higher elements of manna are also found naturally in rocks. Palladium, ruthenium and rhodium, for instance, are key components in certain rocks around the planet. This compels us to re-evaluate the stone chambers used by our ancestors, the same chambers that utilized the longer light frequencies normally found in a sunrise and sunset, reds, oranges and yellows. And we already know that the Egyptians commonly exported grain, linen, gold, and more than likely manna. If this was used in the chambers in conjunction with the sun at key times of the year, the vessel was also affected, which meant the entire stone structure, because of the elements found naturally in the stone, would lose part of its mass, up to 44% to be precise. The doorway to the gods was now open for business. If the powder was kept in a box lined with metal, all manner of oddities happened. The box became a superconductor, unaffected by the rules of magnetics. Considering the earlier descriptions of the Ark of the Covenant, wasn't it a box lined with gold and filled with white sand? Isn't it possible that it was in fact the elusive white powder produced from gold and not sand at all? When we examine the disappearances brought to light by David Paulides, he states that many of the strange occurrences happen in boulder fields. Is it possible the rocks that hold the higher components of the white powder are not being activated by us, but by someone or something else on the other side of the doorways? There are many accounts of people that have witnessed a glimpse of these doorways by accident. They described seeing an almost transparent shimmer nearby, much like the surface of water. They are lucky they did not fall victim by stumbling into these strange doorways. Think back to the act of throwing a stone into calm water and watching as it would produce a span of ripples. Equally, sound works much the same way. The sound ripples created by our ancestors in the passage chambers through a low vibration were tuned to 110 Hz. Is it conceivable that the cave paintings and the twists and circles carved into the walls of the chambers are in fact depictions of frequencies and the doorways as they open? Evidence would suggest that the consumption of manna was part of the ceremony that took place on the equinoxes. The effect, as we mentioned, was instant. High priests and kings increased their mental and spiritual range in order to communicate with the gods. These gods had little time or patience for people of lesser intellect. Biologically, each of us has a certain amount of monatomic gold in our genetic makeup. So, consider this the next time you sit and watch a majestic orange sunset in the evening sky, as this is a perfect time for meditation. This strange element in our bodies that nature bestowed on us can be activated by the longer light frequencies from our presiding life-giver. It has been known by many names. Among them is Ra, Shamash, Utu, Apollo and Helios. Today, however, we who have lost the knowledge and the way of the ancients know it as the sun.
Are you crazy?